My wife heard me say I wouldn't choose her. Then she disappeared quietly, and one missing place card at Christmas destroyed every lie I'd been telling my family. The chair scraped back before I knew I was standing. Everyone at my father's Christmas table froze. Mom's fork halfway to her mouth, Trevor's wine glass suspended in his hand. Even little Owen stopped kicking the table leg long enough to stare up at me. And across from me, my brother was still smiling that smile, the one I had spent weeks building, the one I had handed him piece by piece like a weapon I couldn't wait to watch him use. I had given him every lie. I just didn't know the person it would kill was me. I need to back up. Because if I start at the moment Sarah walked out our front door, you'll miss all the ways I pretended it didn't mean anything. And that would be the wrong story, the easier story. The one where I'm the abandoned husband, and she's the one who couldn't handle her feelings. I told that story for 3 weeks. I was very good at it. Here's the true one. Sarah and I had been married for 7 years when this happened. 7 years of what I would have called a functional partnership, and what she would have called, I understand now, something quieter and lonelier than I ever bothered to notice. We'd met at a mutual friend's housewarming in the fall of 2016. She was the one standing in the kitchen, refilling people's drinks without being asked, cracking open beers, wiping the counter between trips, not working the room, not performing, just there, useful and unbothered, while the rest of us pretended to be more interesting than we were. I found that attractive at first, her stillness, her competence. Later, I found it invisible. That's the thing about a person who handles things quietly. You stop noticing the things are being handled. You just walk on the clean floor and never wonder who mopped it. You just eat the dinner and never think about what time she got up to start it. You just arrive at a family gathering where everything runs smoothly and take credit for having picked a partner who runs smoothly. Sarah was a structural engineer for a mid-sized commercial firm in town. She was good at her job in the way she was good at everything. Methodically, without announcement. She drove a 2018 RAV4 she'd paid cash for. She made the same lasagna every year for Christmas, and it was always perfect. She knew the exact moment my mother's car needed an oil change because she paid attention to things nobody else did. She also remembered things, small things, the anniversary of my grandfather's death, which I sometimes forgot, the name of my coworker's kid who I'd mentioned once in passing 8 months earlier, the brand of coffee I always reached for when I was stressed, so she'd have it ready on bad weather Mondays. I noticed this the way you notice good weather, as a baseline, not a gift, as simply the way things were. My family liked her because she showed up. What I mean by that is literal. When my mother's car broke down on the shoulder of I-90 at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday in November, Sarah got in the RAV4 and drove 2 hours in the dark without being asked. She got there before the tow truck. She rode in the cab back to the garage and waited while they assessed the damage, and then drove my mother home at 2 a.m. and had coffee ready by the time I woke up at 7. My mother said, "She's a wonderful person." I said, "She's very reliable." I didn't hear the difference until it was almost too late. I liked her because she required so little. There is something seductive about a person who does not need you to perform. Sarah was never impressed by the version of me that impressed other people. The quick wit, the social ease, the ability to make any room feel like I'd arranged it. She had married the person underneath that, and she seemed to find him sufficient, and I had always experienced that as a relief. I had started to experience it as boredom. That should have been my red flag. But it's hard to see a red flag when it's planted in your own hand. And harder still, when the thing you're bored by is someone else's goodness. My brother Trevor was 3 years younger than me and operated at a frequency I had never quite matched. He was the one who called our mother crying at midnight and got picked up, the one whose dramatic exits from family dinners past had somehow become family legend and not cautionary tale. He loved me the way loud people love quiet ones, by assuming whatever I wasn't saying must match whatever he was feeling. He was also intensely loyal. That's the thing I don't want to lose in this telling. His anger on my behalf was never performed. It was real, and it was deep, and it had been one of the constants of my life since we were children sharing a room in our parents' house. When I was 12 and a kid at school told everyone I'd cried during a movie, Trevor, 9 years old, missing his 2 front teeth, walked up to that kid in the cafeteria and told him he had a face like a disappointed potato. He got sent home. He didn't apologize. He protected me the way he'd always protected me. I just made sure to aim him at the wrong thing. He was not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. He was a person I had taught to read me wrong for 35 years, and he had never had reason to doubt his translation. So when I told him, in early October, that Sarah had left, that she'd just walked out after a fight, he pulled on his armor and went to war for me the way he always did. I let him. I should tell you how it started. The real start, not the leaving. It was a Tuesday night in September. We'd had Trevor over for dinner, a rarity, because Trevor in our kitchen always meant the evening would stretch long and loud, and I would feel vaguely exhausted by 8. But Sarah had made enchiladas and opened a good bottle, and we'd sat out back long past dark, and somewhere in the 3rd glass of wine, the conversation had done what wine conversations do. It had gone somewhere honest that I wasn't prepared to defend. Trevor had asked me, not unkindly, if I ever felt like Sarah and I had peaked. He was in the middle of his own complicated situationship with a woman named Brianna, who he was convinced was his great love, and he needed company in the territory of romantic dissatisfaction, the way he needed most things, urgently and with witnesses. I said what I always said when he pushed into marital territory. I deflected with humor. I made a joke about Sarah's obsessive approach to meal planning. I said something about how passion was for people with fewer bills. He laughed. I laughed. And then he said, but honestly, if you met her now, today, would you even date her? I was on my third glass of wine. It was a Tuesday. I was tired in the particular way I was often tired. Not from anything specific, just from the low hum of a life that was fine. Honestly, I said, probably not. We laughed again. He said something about how that was true for everyone after 7 years. I agreed. We moved on. I didn't hear the sound from inside the house. I didn't hear the soft fall of footsteps on the kitchen tile. Didn't hear the dish towel placed on the counter. Didn't hear the keys lifted from the hook by the door. I heard the click. The front door. Soft. Deliberate. I turned to Trevor. That's Sarah leaving. He blinked. Where's she going? I have absolutely no idea. I called it dramatic that night. I called it an overreaction. I told Trevor she was someone who'd never learned how to lose gracefully, and he nodded along, and we opened a fourth bottle, and by the time he left at midnight, I had the full shape of a story I could use. It was a comfortable story. It let me sleep. The problem was Sarah. She was supposed to yell, "Come home furious, demand an apology, give me something to push back against." That's how these things go. That's the shape of a fight I knew how to navigate. The raised voices, the doors, the period of icy distance that thaws by Friday when someone buys a sorry pizza and they eat it in front of Netflix and everything quietly resets. I could handle that. I was fluent in that. She did none of that. She texted at 10:52 that night, staying at Priya's. Mortgage auto pays on the 15th. Don't worry about the gas bill. And that was it. I stared at that message for a long time. I kept waiting for the follow-up, the accusation, the how could you, the I heard everything. Nothing came. She reached out exactly twice in the first week. Once to ask if I needed her to swing by for her work clothes. Once to confirm our shared credit card's payment date. Both messages were polite. Both were brief. Both were so carefully stripped of emotion that I couldn't find a single foothold. Priya, I should tell you, was Sarah's oldest friend. They'd known each other since college, roomed together their sophomore and junior years. Priya Nair was a quiet woman in a similar mold, a landscape architect, thoughtful, the kind of person who listened twice as much as she spoke. She would not have told me anything even if I'd asked, because Priya had an almost constitutional aversion to anyone else's drama, and she and Sarah operated on the same frequency of we don't make things into things unless they need to be. I knew Sarah was safe at Priya's. I knew she was eating, sleeping, showing up to work. She was not falling apart. That made it harder, not easier. A falling apart Sarah I could have scooped up and fixed. A Sarah who was quietly putting one foot in front of the other, managing the mortgage, retrieving her work shirts. That Sarah was beyond my usual tools. She was not punishing me with her silence. I know that now. She was just deciding. I couldn't name that in October. What I named it was, she's making me the bad guy by being so goddamn reasonable. So I went to work. I told my father we were on a break and needed space, and that I couldn't really say more than that, which is the perfect thing to say to a man whose mind will fill the silence with the most Sarah-unflattering version of events. Dad had always liked Sarah, but he liked me more. Fathers do. And what I'd told him, in the careful language of someone who has been hurt, activated the older, more primal loyalty. I told my mother Sarah was struggling with something and wasn't being communicative, which is the kind of thing mothers hear as, she's not stepping up. My mother had built her identity around stepping up. She was a retired nurse, 30 years, and she believed in showing your face when things got hard. The idea that Sarah had simply gone away landed exactly where I needed it to. I told Trevor everything, every resentment I'd been quietly banking, every time I'd felt like we were roommates with shared finances, every occasion she'd been too tired to make plans, too frugal to splurge, too steady to be exciting. I handed him the whole museum of small disappointments I'd been curating for 7 years, and he walked through it with me, validating every piece. She's always been like that, he'd say. She takes you for granted, he'd say. You deserve someone who makes you feel chosen, he'd say. And I would nod and feel the exact thing I needed to feel. Blameless. What I didn't tell any of them was what I'd said to the bathroom mirror the morning after Sarah left. I didn't tell them I'd stood there looking at myself at 7 a.m. with coffee going cold on the counter and thought, she's right. She heard exactly what you actually think. I told myself that thought was just guilt, just the echo of conflict, that I didn't really mean it. I filed it away in the same place I filed everything that didn't fit the story. This went on for 3 weeks. We had a joint session with Dr. Marcus Feld, a marriage therapist Sarah had found and made the appointment for. He was located on the second floor of a building on Hartwell Avenue, Suite 204, with a waiting room that smelled like cedar and had 2 chairs that I immediately clocked as deliberately mismatched, one soft, one structured, so neither person would feel like they'd been assigned the defensive position. Sarah had booked the appointment. Sarah had sent me the address. Sarah had confirmed the time, 3 p.m. on a Wednesday, and texted that morning to ask if I still wanted to go. I texted back, "I'll be there." What I felt in the car on the way over was not the feeling of someone doing the right thing. It was the feeling of someone managing a situation. There's a difference, and I knew the difference, and I ignored it. Marcus had 13 years in couples therapy and a master's in clinical psychology from the University of Minnesota. He was a tall man, early 60s, with reading glasses he wore on a beaded chain, and a way of sitting very still that I initially mistook for boredom. He was not bored. He was, I would learn, simply very good at not moving in ways that indicated alliance. He did not take sides. He asked us each to describe the evening in question. I said, "I didn't know she was there." I said, "It was a throwaway comment between brothers." I said, "She's making this into something it wasn't." I said it all evenly and with just enough vulnerability, a small pause here, a careful wording there, to telegraph the image of a man who was genuinely trying. I was very good at that. Sarah said, "I heard what I heard." 3 words. No performance, just the flat, immovable fact of it. Marcus asked Sarah how she felt when she heard it. She thought about it for what felt like a very long time. Long enough that I had started to prepare a follow-up, some gentle very long time. Long enough that I had started to prepare a follow-up, some gentle redirect, something that would soften the terrain back toward me. Like I finally had permission to believe what I'd suspected for a while. She said. I wanted to argue with that, but I didn't know exactly what I would have been arguing against. I knew what she meant. I could feel what she meant. I just couldn't afford to let that land in a room where a professional was watching my face. Marcus wrote something on his notepad. I caught a half-second glimpse before he closed it. Permission to believe. He asked me to respond. I said something about how I thought we'd both gotten stuck in patterns, and that I had some things to work through, and that I hoped we could use this as an opportunity to rebuild something. It was the kind of thing that sounded like honesty, and was actually a performance of it. I had given enough of those in my life to know the difference in texture. Marcus listened. He did not nod encouragingly. He just listened. We agreed to a second session. Sarah went back to Priya's place. I went home and called Trevor and told him she was playing the victim in couples therapy, that she'd barely said a word and left me doing all the work. And he called her emotionally unavailable, and I let him. I let him because it was easier than sitting with what I'd seen Marcus write, easier than admitting that Sarah's 3 words had been more honest than my 200. The second session never happened. Sarah texted me at 7 p.m. the night before. "I don't think we're ready for that yet. I need more time." I called Trevor at 7:04. I told him she'd refused to do the work. I told him I'd tried and she'd shut it down. He said that was exactly the problem. She didn't know how to be vulnerable. She didn't know how to show up. She was comfortable being the wronged party because it let her off the hook. "You deserve someone who fights for the marriage," he said. "Yeah," I said. I believed it. Right up until the point I was standing in my father's kitchen at noon on Christmas Eve, watching him write Sarah's name in blue pen on printer paper, and something in me started to come very loose at the edges. I was building a jury, one dinner, one phone call, one retelling at a time. By Christmas, everyone in my family would understand exactly what I needed them to understand, that I was the wronged party in a conflict I had nothing to do with creating, and it was working, right up until the place card. My father's Christmas setup was something he started working on in the 3rd week of November. He had cream-colored cardstock he ordered from a paper company in New Hampshire. He had a particular pen he used, a fine-tip Micron in black ink, and he wrote each name in a careful, slightly formal script that looked like someone had taught him cursive in a one-room schoolhouse in 1958. Mom, Dad, Trevor, Brianna, Owen, the cousin, the uncle who never ate anything, and me. When I arrived at noon to help set up, the table was already laid. I walked the length of it the way I always did, trailing my fingers across the cloth, looking for where I'd been seated. I found my card between Trevor's and my father's. I found Sarah's place setting, the plate, the fork, the water glass, the folded napkin, at the end of the table. No card. I stood there for a moment. The room smelled like cinnamon and butter and the nutmeg my father put in the eggnog for reasons no one had ever questioned. "Dad," I said, "Sarah doesn't have a name card." He came in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. God, that dish towel. I would see dish towels differently for a long time after that year, and looked at the table with the mildly distracted expression of a man managing 17 simultaneous cooking timelines. "I didn't know if she was coming," he said. "She's in our driveway," I said. She'd followed my car from our house. She'd texted the night before to ask if it was all right, and I'd said yes because it would have looked strange to say no, and I needed things to look normal. And now she was outside in an RAV4 that she'd owned free and clear for 4 years, while my father stood holding a dish towel and explaining that he'd run out of cardstock. He found a blank piece from the printer, wrote her name in blue pen, hurried and slightly crooked, tucked it at the far corner where the table leg pressed against whatever chair got stuck there. Sarah came in 20 minutes later. She said hello to my parents. She shook Trevor's hand, crouched down to say something to Owen that made him smile, and then found her seat at the end of the table like a person who had gotten comfortable navigating the margins of rooms she'd been welcomed into. I watched her sit down. I watched her unfold her napkin. I watched her look at the blue ink card with her name on it, slightly tilted in the corner where the table leg was, and I thought, you're fine. This is fine. Everything is fine. The wine came out. The food came out. My mother said grace in her particular way, personal, a little long, more about gratitude for the people present than any formal theology, and we passed dishes and filled plates, and the conversation moved the way it always moved at my father's table, around everyone and through nothing, skimming every surface clean. I thought I had survived it. An hour in, I honestly thought I had. Then Trevor held his wine glass low at his waist. I knew the gesture. It was the one he made before he said something he'd been sitting on for a while, the gathering of energy before the swing. I just think, he said, and every adult at that table recognized the sentence structure, the opener that wasn't really an opener but a verdict, that it takes a certain kind of person to disappear for 3 weeks and then show up to Christmas like everything's fine. My mother looked at her plate. My father picked up a serving dish that didn't need to be moved. Sarah kept her eyes down. You said something in a moment, Trevor continued, that maybe wasn't your best moment. Fine. But a grown woman doesn't vanish. She doesn't make her husband manage that alone. She doesn't, Trevor, my mother said. No, I'm serious. He spent 3 weeks not knowing if his marriage was over, and she's just sitting there like, stop. It came out of me before I decided to say it. Trevor turned toward me. I was on my feet. I hadn't decided to stand. I was just standing, the same way I'd arrived at the worst decision of my marriage, without planning, without weight, without the faintest awareness of what I was choosing until I'd already chosen it. Stop defending me with the lie I gave you, I said. The table went completely still. She didn't leave because I vented, I said. She left because I told you I wouldn't choose her. In our kitchen, 10 feet from where she was standing. My mother's hand went to her mouth. And when she came home to talk about it, I said, I made it worse. I told her she was overreacting. I turned her hurt into a list of complaints I'd been holding for 7 years. I used her pain as an excuse to unload mine. I could feel Trevor trying to recalibrate. His face was doing the thing it did when he was searching for a new foothold. You don't have to do this, he said. His voice had changed. It was softer, confused. I know. Then why? Because you're about to make her pain into my alibi. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the architecture of the argument he'd been ready to win for me. And I built that alibi. I handed it to you piece by piece every night for 3 weeks. You didn't do anything wrong. You loved me in the language I taught you. But I'm done. I'm done letting that language be the one Sarah has to live in. The room had no sound except for the furnace kicking on, and Owen's quiet breathing, and the particular silence of people who understand they have witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. I looked down the table. Sarah's hands were flat on either side of her plate. Every dinner, I said. I wasn't talking to Trevor anymore. Every cookout, every birthday. You drove 2 hours when Mom's car broke down and didn't complain once. You fixed the shelves in Trevor's apartment and didn't ask him to even thank you. You made the lasagna every Christmas, and nobody ever said your name at the table without a joke attached to it, and I handed them that too. I never said stop. I never said enough. I took the easy laugh and left you to manage the rest. Sarah's jaw moved. She didn't speak. I know you heard me that night, I said. I know it wasn't new information. I know you'd been waiting for permission to believe it because you told the therapist that, and I sat there and argued against it, and then went home and retold the whole session to Trevor in a version where you were the one being difficult. My throat felt very tight. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. I'm sorry for the place card. I'm sorry you've been sitting at this table for 7 years in the corner where the leg hits your knee. Nobody moved. Sarah stood up slowly. She touched the back of her chair. That gesture, one hand on the wood, steadying herself or deciding something or both. I would think about it for a long time afterward. I don't know what to do with that, she said. Her voice was quiet. It was always quiet. I had spent years calling that reserve and meaning it as a compliment, but living it as a complaint. I don't know what you want from tonight. I don't want anything from tonight, I said. I just don't want you to eat Christmas dinner with a blue pen name card in the corner while my brother uses my lies to dismantle you. A sound came from Trevor's direction, not quite a word. Sarah looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked around the table, at my parents, at Trevor, at little Owen, who had stopped kicking the table leg and was watching us with the wide, serious eyes of a child who doesn't understand the content of what's happening but can feel the weight of it perfectly. I love your family, Sarah said. Her voice cracked, barely, on the last word. She picked up her wine glass. She sat back down. Nobody spoke for a full 10 seconds. Then my father cleared his throat and said, "Well, who wants more of the stuffing?" in the voice he used when he was declaring a ceasefire. And my mother started passing dishes, and Owen asked for more cranberry sauce with the reindeer sticker on his card, and the dinner continued. Not the same as before. Nothing was going to be the same as before, but Sarah ate at that table on Christmas. And this time, when my father said something about the garden, some joke about Sarah and her raised beds, Sarah just smiled, and I said quietly, "She She built those from scratch, Dad. And my father looked at me, and he nodded. Small, but real. We went back to Dr. Marcus Feld's office the week after Christmas. Sarah had texted me the night of the dinner from the driveway before he'd even started the RAV4. Can we reschedule the second session? I had texted back, yes, I'll set it up. I set it up the next morning, 8 a.m., before I'd had coffee, before I'd let myself think about it too long and find a reason not to. I emailed Marcus's office, and his assistant, a polite man named Diego, who'd been scheduling couples into crisis sessions for what appeared to be a very long time, had us in at 10 a.m. the following Tuesday. Marcus was in the same seat, same reading glasses, same stillness. He looked at both of us, and I saw something in his expression that I hadn't seen in October. Not surprise, exactly. More like he had been waiting to see which version of this couple would eventually appear. He asked what had changed. I told him about Christmas. The whole thing, the place card and standing up, and the speech I hadn't planned, and the particular look on Trevor's face when I said, "Stop defending me with the lie I gave you." I told him about the dish towel that was Sarah's fault to begin with, and somehow also a symbol now. I told him about the table leg in the corner and the years of cookouts where I'd handed the mic to whoever had a joke about Sarah's garden. Marcus listened differently this time. He didn't have to work as hard to find the neutral ground. It was easier when both people were telling the same story, when neither person was managing the room. He asked Sarah to tell him what the Christmas speech had meant to her. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands. It meant I hadn't been wrong about what I'd been hearing, she said. Not just that night, for a long time. She paused. I kept thinking I was reading the room too harshly, that I was too sensitive, that I was making myself small because I wanted to, not because the room required it. She looked up. Then someone said it out loud without meaning to. Marcus asked her what she wanted now. "I want to know if the room can be different," she said. She wasn't looking at Marcus when she said it. She was looking at me. He called it a complimentary wound. I'd never heard the phrase before. He explained it carefully, not as an excuse, but as a map. Some couples find each other specifically because their damage fits together in a way that feels, for a time, like compatibility. Some couples find each other specifically because their damage fits together in a way that feels, for a time, like compatibility. Her pattern of graceful invisibility had met my pattern of social performance, each reinforcing the other's worst tendencies. She'd learned to take up less space. I'd learned to take up more. The room had always been the right size for us to avoid noticing the problem. The question, Marcus said, isn't whether the wound fits. It's whether you're both willing to want something different now. He said it in the careful way he said everything, not as a challenge, just as a point on a map. Here is where you are. This is the direction the work goes. We looked at each other across his office. Yeah, Sarah said. I am. Me too, I said. That was February. We're still in therapy. We go every 2 weeks. Marcus is good in the way few people are good at things. Not from talent, but from having done it long enough to understand that what people say in his office is rarely the thing they mean, and what they mean is rarely the thing they need, and his job is to close the distance between all three. He told me once, in a session Sarah had stepped out of briefly, that my instinct to make the Christmas speech had been the first, genuinely honest thing I'd done in the relationship in years, that it had come at enormous personal cost, that I should sit with how good honesty felt even when it was terrifying. Most people, he said, build the jury and then have to live in the verdict. I'm sitting with that. It's still a little terrifying, but it feels, in the way few things have felt recently, like being on the right side of something. Trevor called me 2 days after Christmas. He was quiet on the phone, which was itself a kind of seismic event. He said he'd been thinking about the dinner, about the things I'd said, about the version of events he'd been carrying for 3 weeks. I should have asked you more questions, he said. I wouldn't have answered them honestly. I said, maybe, but I should have asked. We talked for an hour. It was one of the stranger conversations we've had, which is saying something. He apologized to Sarah in a text that I did not see the contents of, but that Sarah showed me anyway, because she was done with secret territories and so was I. It was honest, a little awkward. It ended with an offer to bring beer to our next cookout. She texted back, "I'll take you up on that. The place card is still on the table." I know that sounds strange, but after dinner, when we were cleaning up and everyone was moving through my father's kitchen, in that post-feast shuffle of foil and leftovers, I picked it up. The blue pen one with Sarah's name and my father's hurried handwriting. I don't know why I kept it. Some instinct I didn't examine. It's in the kitchen drawer now at our house. Third drawer from the left, the one with the spare batteries and the takeout menus, and the things we mean to sort through and never do. Sometimes I open that drawer for something else and I see it. Sarah's name, in blue ink, slightly crooked, a placeholder that almost became a conclusion. I think about what it would have meant if I'd let the dinner go the way I'd planned, if I'd sat there and let Trevor wield the story I'd given him, if Sarah had eaten her food in the corner by the table leg and said nothing, and gone home to Priya's apartment and never come back. I would have told that story for years. I would have believed it. The scariest part isn't the version where Sarah leaves. The scariest part is the version where I never stop needing the story to make sense. That version of me is still out there, probably, somewhere, telling a jury. But he sat down at Christmas, and I stood up instead.